Antarctica was supposed to be empty. A vast wasteland. Nothing at the bottom of the map. That picture held until the instruments started disagreeing with the assumptions. As the expeditions pushed inland through the mid-20th century, the readings stopped making sense. Heat signatures where there shouldn't have been any. Ice holding where every calculation said it should have collapsed. Air moving through spaces that by every model anyone trusted were sealed shut. At first the scientists thought it was faulty gear. It usually is. But when separate teams operating miles apart started logging the same anomalies, that excuse stopped being plausible. This wasn't a glitch. What they had found wasn't just a cave. It was a system of interconnected voids, stable, insulated, running deeper than anyone had expected. And that changed the entire conversation, because nobody is interested in archaeology anymore. By the dawn of the atomic age, the only question that actually mattered was survivability. Buried under a mile of ice, you're insulated from blast pressure, from fallout, from the kinds of electromagnetic collapse that takes out every grid above ground. And beyond all of that, you're invisible, not just physically, but politically too. Antarctica had no population, no recognized sovereignty, no civilian oversight. It was the last place on Earth where something could be built slowly, quietly, without anyone asking for a briefing or a budget review. So the question was never what had been here before, it was what could survive here next. Once that got asked, Antarctica stopped being irrelevant. It became useful. By the early 1950s, Antarctica had a problem. Not a political one, a foot traffic one. Too many nations were showing up with too many questions about a continent that had stopped, behaving like a blank sheet of ice. Left alone, it would turn into a jurisdictional war. And wars invite one thing nobody in this operation wanted: attention. The solution wasn't secrecy. Secrecy implies that you've got something worth hiding. The solution was something else. It was boredom. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, and it was a spin doctor's masterpiece. Publicly, it was sold as a rare moment of international cooperation, science, peace, everyone getting along. But peace wasn't the actual objective. Management was. Freezing territorial claims didn't remove national interest. It paralyzed it. Created a stalemate where no one could move openly without triggering everyone else. Antarctica became politically inert, and that was by design. The treaty prohibited military activity, except for science and support purposes. But that loophole is wide enough to drive a carrier group through. Enormous capability could exist under a harmless label. A runway, it's just a runway. A reactor is just power generation. And a subsurface structure, well, let's call it storage. Legal, documented, entirely unexplained to anyone outside of the chain. The treaty didn't hide the activity, it buried it under process. Any serious inquiry required multinational consensus. Any allegation could be diluted in committees for years. The fastest way to kill a question is to distribute it responsibly, until no one actually owns it anymore. What looked like transparency was engineered fiction. No mining, no commercial interest. That meant large expenditures didn't read as greed. They vanished into the background noise of research. No citizens watching the flights. No press gallery tracking the budget. If you wanted to build something designed to outlast the government paying for it, Antarctica was the obvious address. In 1946, the United States launched Operation Highjump. 13 ships, aircraft carriers, and thousands of personnel. Officially framed as training, but a major part of it was a logistics test, with one central question: can you actually run a sustained operation this far south? The answer came back yes, and that changed everything. A decade later, permanence followed. Operation Deep Freeze stood up in 1955 under Rear Admiral George Dufek. And when you look at Dufek's pre-Antarctic service records, you'll find a Cold War strategist, trusted with missions where failure had a geopolitical consequence, and success itself required silence. That profile matters, because this was never really about the continent. It was about how to reach it without being noticed. Antarctic operations needed a gateway, a port, an airfield, political cover. Argentina was closer geographically, but disqualifying on nearly every other count. Competing territorial claims, unstable governments, and an appetite for visibility. The Falklands conflict would later confirm what planners already knew. Anything staged through Argentina would eventually demand to be seen. Now, New Zealand, at the bottom of the planet, was the opposite. By the height of the Cold War, New Zealand had 2.4 million people spread across an area larger than the UK, and with roughly 60 million sheep, it functioned less like a population centre and more like a large farm at the very edge of the Western world. No nuclear ambitions, no Antarctic claims, no interest in anything that might end up in the newspaper. New Zealand's second largest city, Christchurch, became the declared departure point. With a population of only 300,000 people, it was quiet enough to work from, large enough to not look unusual. Every flight south could be logged and justified. Nothing suspicious about the departure. And that's the trick. You don't hide the departure point, you hide where it lands. Once aircraft cleared New Zealand territorial waters, the transponders went dark. Officially, everything was heading to McMurdo station, but not every flight arrived at McMurdo. Some went somewhere else. A second airfield on hard-packed blue ice, not featuring on any civilian charts. Parts of Antarctica are blurred on Google Earth, and that's not to hide the buildings, it's to hide the runways. The tracks end at what looks like a rock face, a cut portal, but it's an engineered shaft leading into the upper ring of an infrastructure below. That shaft doesn't lead to an archive, it leads to what surrounds one. The vault was never accessed through science stations. It was accessed through logistics, masked by volume, invisible because nothing appeared to deviate from routine. You don't conceal secrets by force. You conceal them by making them boring. To this day, Operation Deep Freeze continues, and because it's boring, people have stopped discussing it. You've heard the term that history is written by the victors. Not quite. It's engineered by whoever survives long enough to care about the record. Stability needs faith. You have to believe that the government knows what it's doing, that your money means something, that the people responsible for your safety are actually trying. The truth is usually the first thing quietly moved aside to keep that faith intact. Because if people understood how routinely their safety gets traded for leverage, the whole arrangement falls apart pretty fast. The vault doesn't store the official record. It stores the liabilities. It stores what actually happened. Take 1962 for instance, Operation Northwards. The standalone story is that the military exists to defend the public. But there are declassified memos in these files from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they don't read like a defence plan. What they do read like are proposed hijackings of civilian aircraft, blowing up US ships, and staging terror attacks in Miami. All of this was designed to be blamed on Cuba. The Joint Chiefs, they wanted a war, and they needed public support for one. So they drafted a plan to manufacture a reason. Kennedy rejected it, and that decision fed directly into what came after. This wasn't some rogue colonel acting alone. It was almost signed off at the very top. The history books log it as a rejected proposal. The vault records it as something else. Proof that, to the state, the public isn't the priority. It is a variable. Now look at the Invention Secrecy Act. Not just a way to hide military technology. It's an economic containment mechanism. If someone patents a way to generate power without fuel, That's not a breakthrough, it's a threat. It threatens the petrodollar and every system of control built around keeping the meter running. The patents get seized, a secrecy order is issued, the technology disappears, and the official position remains: we're still working on it, even if some of that work was done 50 years ago and shelved. The sanitized version of history exists merely to convince you that somebody competent is steering the ship. The raw feed suggests something a little closer to the truth. Now, a facility of this size can't rely on a garrison. Why? Garrisons leak. People talk. They get lonely. They carry things home in their heads they were never meant to carry. Pure automation isn't the answer either, because machines break. Entropy always collects as debt. So the engineers and architects of the Vault landed on a compromise. Not an army, not a machine, but a ghost crew, 4 or 5 people at most, selected not for rank but durability. The kind of psychological profile that showed the person stayed intact when the situation was specifically designed to break them. You don't staff a place like this with somebody who has family marking off days on a calendar. You send the ones who are genuinely comfortable with the dark, the silence and the weight of knowing certain things that they can't talk about. Their job isn't to run the facility. The automation handles that side. The crew supervises the quiet, keeps the system stable, makes sure nothing happens that attracts attention from the surface. Less than 5 people under a mile of ice keep watching over a record of history. That's the Vault's last line of defense. And what happens when the supply chain breaks? Those flights out of Christchurch work because of volume. The routes stay invisible because they look like routine. And those systems only hold for as long as the surface would remain stable enough to maintain them. When the geopolitical picture shifts, or a primary data link goes permanently dark, the operational doctrine changes immediately. A public science station broadcasts a distress signal when contact is lost, but a black site does the opposite. It goes quiet, and if the skeleton crew find itself cut off, there is no rescue mission. The Vault isn't designed to be saved. It's designed to be forgotten. So the shafts they seal. The thermal footprint drops to nothing, and the archive waits. And the crew, well, they're expendable. That's the part that never gets discussed. Not the technology, not the scale of what was built down there over the last 50 years. The simple, cold, tactical reality that, if the grid goes down, the base locks its doors and executes its final orders without making a sound. There are no distress calls, no last transmission, just the ice and whatever it's keeping. And the nickname the crew give the Vault? They call it Thinkavarium. Thanks for joining me here today, and remember, they rely on you forgetting, on you clicking away. Don't do it. Go deeper down the rabbit hole with this next video. And to make sure the signal can find you again, join the network, turn on notifications and click subscribe here, and keep the light alive. This is Thinkavarium.